What's up, everybody? I've been trying to go back to the roots of this information game back when people did actual research instead of just repeating what they heard somebody else say. And I was going to start with some Fritz Springmeier 13 Bloodlines, but since it referenced this book so many times, I thought we'd just start here. This is The Conspirators' Hierarchy, The Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman. And people ask all the time and I answer all the time, but once again, I this is on Internet Archive. Just about all of the old books that I read on here I usually get from Internet Archive. The hard part is finding out what books exist out there, but if it's more than 20, 30 years old, it's usually on Internet Archive. I usually skip things like the foreword, but there's some important points to be made here. And I'm also not just going to do a straight read. I'm going to be critical of the material here because in today's world, I think you're much better off being very critical of every piece of information you absorb. If you're going to build your whole worldview around something, then make sure it's pretty solid. In my career as a professional intelligence officer, I had many occasions to access highly classified documents, but during service as a political science officer in the field in Angola, West Africa, I had the opportunity to view a series of top secret classified documents which were unusually explicit. Now, that is a subjective claim, and I'm not saying anything's untrue here. I'm just doing critical thinking as we go. But that is a subjective claim that he was privy to secret information here. So, is he going to provide receipts on that? What I saw filled me with anger and resentment and launched me on a course from which I have not deviated, namely to uncover what power it is that controls and manages the British and the United States governments. I was thoroughly familiar with all of the well known secret societies, such as the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, Trilaterals, the Lyonese, Freemasons, Bolshevik, Rosicrucianism, and all the spin offs of these secret societies. As an intelligence officer, and even before that, as a young student in the course of my studies at the British Museum in London, I had cut my eye teeth on all of them, plus a good number of others with whom I imagined Americans were familiar. But when I came to the United States in 1969, I found that names like the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Club of Rome, the German Marshall Fund, the Cini Foundation, the Round Table, the Fabianists, the Venetian Black Nobility, the Mount Perilyn Society, Hellfire Clubs, and many others were at best totally unknown here, or else their true functions were at best but poorly understood, if at all. In 1969 and 70, I set about remedying the situation in a series of monographs and cassette tapes. Much to my surprise, I soon found plenty of people willing to quote these names as if they had known them all of their writing careers, but who were not in the least bit knowledgeable about the subjects. Now, this is what I see all the time today is people dropping names because of the internet lore associated with them, and they have no idea what that actually means. And this has made a hackable formula for internet street cred. People like the professor come on and say, are Freemason Jesuit overlords. And a lot of people will say, well, he obviously knows what he's talking about. You drop some Shabbatian, Frankists, and Jacobinism in there, and this dude's a wise sage. All I'm saying is just because somebody drops some names doesn't mean what they're saying is right. I'm going to skim through to the important parts here. We frequently hear about they. They seem to be able to get away with anything. They seem out of sight, frustratingly nebulous when it comes to taking action against them. No one seems to be able to clearly identify who they are. And the intent of this book is to identify the they. Now, this is one that's intellectually frustrating because they get used for everything to the point where people ignore what's right in front of their face looking for the they. For example, these two, JoJo comes out and says, we're going to have an unrelenting stream of immigration until legacy Americans are an absolute minority, and it's great. And then right to his left is Alejandro Mayorkas, who, as director of Homeland Security, told Border Patrol agents to stand down and look the other way. And we know that this is an international agenda used all across Europe and the United States by they, but these are the two that actually held the positions to make all that happen here, which tells us what? That they have to have people in these positions to make this stuff happen. From 2016 to 2020, Europe was getting flooded, but the US wasn't because Trump was president. It wasn't till they got their guy in that they were able to accomplish this. So that means those positions actually do hold power. Otherwise, they would have just decreed whatever they want, and why bother running a campaign from the basement? But my point here is don't ignore the actual criminals looking for the they. If I had the influence the plastic organics have, I would have everybody talking about revoking the auto pen pardon for this a-hole and Fauci and everybody that made everything from 2020 to 2024 happen. But no, Erica Kirk's definitely the problem. The other problem with the they is who says it's just one they? I know that makes everything fit in a nice, neat, easy to remember box, but it shouldn't be presumed. The upper level parallel secret government does not operate from dank basements and secret underground chambers. It places itself in full view in the White House, Congress, and in number 10 Downing Street and the House of Parliament. Like I said, you got to have those positions to wield the power. And I'll just tell you, 10 years ago, I thought that the presidency was largely a ceremonial position. But what I've seen since then completely changed my mind. That's too long of a story, but we do live under the rule of law. Everything is rules and regulations. This is the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the heads of each branch of the armed forces. And they're going to do what the commander in chief, the president, tells them to do. Otherwise, they'll be court martialed. So you have to hold that position to wield the power of our military. And he's basically agreeing with that idea by saying that they hold positions in the White House, Congress, and 10 Downing Street. And that the real monsters wear business suits and drive to work on Capitol Hill in limousines. These men are in open view. These men are the servants of the one world government, New World Order. Like the artist who stops to offer his victim a friendly ride, he does not look like the monster he is. If he did, his intended victim would run off. The same applies to government at all levels. President Bush does not look like a dutiful servant of the upper level parallel government, but make no mistake about it, he is as much a monster as those horrors found in horror movies. Now, look, the Bush family has been involved in all kinds of stuff. Prescott was back in the Germany days. Bush Senior during the Cold War days. Him and Kissinger had a big part to do with our deep state foreign policy. Then Bush Jr. did Iraq, Afghanistan, where eventually we ended up securing the poppy fields. And in the big picture of world power, drugs and alcohol have been major players in who becomes powerful. Our whole notion of a nation state was basically built off of taxing booze. And then, like the Astor family, the Sassoon family, they were both big opium smugglers to China during the Opium Wars. And the Sackler family behind Oxycontin is one of the richest modern dynasties. So a lot of these esteemed families that went on to have major political influence were basically just the Pablo Escobars that had the government on their side. But now let me be critical here. We're on page 6, and yeah, I skipped over stuff, but it was stuff that had nothing to do with the claim that he sprung on us all of a sudden. All of a sudden, he just says that these are all servants of the one world government. However, he hasn't provided anything to quantify that yet. Bush Jr. was also involved in the New York Towers thing, so it's not hard to believe his claim here that he's a monster. But what proof is there that he's a dutiful servant of the upper level parallel government and not that this power structure that we're talking about right now didn't gain all of its power through Bush Sr. and Henry Kissinger and the likes during the Cold War? Because here's the deal. They financed Leon Trotsky in the early 1900s in New York, and he had a penthouse apartment with a refrigerator, which was only for super rich people at that time. And at that time, he couldn't say, all right, take them out back and whack them. But then once he went to Russia and became the people's commissar for the military affairs, he did have that power. So power is a fickle thing. It can be won and lost in a heartbeat. If you've got $100,000, you got the power to go out and buy you a brand new lifted 4-wheel drive truck. But if you go to the casino, put it all on black and it comes up red, you no longer have that power. You just lost it. So how do we know that the Bush dynasty power goes beyond Skull and Bones, which we know he was a part of, and the power he gained as CIA director? I hope this isn't incredibly boring to watch. I am trying to make a point here. I just showed you guys how it went all across the entire internet that they're trying to shut the world down again 2.0 over the hantavirus, and nothing about that narrative is correct. One chick on Twitter says that hanta means nonsense, lies, or scam in Hebrew, when the word is actually charata, but that incorrect translation has been repeated thousands of times now, and it's just a fact. So the quickest way to stay completely lost in today's information war is to believe everything you hear online. As we shall see, even the Olympians do not hide their faces. Oftentimes, they put on a show which could be likened to the Paris Air Show. He's referring to Germany's top secret plane. Instead of hiding it, they actually put it out in the Paris Air Show where everybody could see it and nobody realized it was the top secret plane. Don't keep looking for the secret of they when you've got the they right in front of you. Even as the conspiracy buffs spend their time in fruitless searching in the wrong places and in the wrong direction. Note how Queen Elizabeth II performs the ceremonial opening of the British Parliament. There, in full view, is the head of the Committee of 300. Have you ever witnessed the swearing-in ceremony of a United States president? There, in full view, is another member of the Committee of 300. The problem is only one of perception. Okay, that's a couple big claims there. First, he says Queen Elizabeth is the head of the Committee of 300. And I know a lot of people would say that her position is almost strictly ceremonial, that she doesn't have any real power. I personally disagree with that, but I'm not trying to argue whether this is correct or incorrect. He just listed her as the head of the committee. I'll just say that I think she was 18 when World War II ended, and she has been briefed weekly on everything going on in the world since 1953. And I think that power lies with whoever the top officials are loyal to. The rank and file are just carrying out orders. It's that top little circle that calls all the shots. So it's a question of, are they loyal to the queen or are they loyal to someone else? But the author claims she's the head of the committee. Then he also claims if you've ever watched a president being sworn in, then you've seen another member of the committee. But he doesn't clarify what he means by that. I'm assuming the president's sworn in by the Chief Justice, so I think he's claiming Chief Justice is a member, but he doesn't provide any evidence to back that up, and then different subject on the next paragraph. Who are the conspirators who serve the mighty, all-powerful Committee of 300? The better informed of our citizens are aware that there is a conspiracy, and that the conspiracy goes under various names such as the Illuminati, Freemasonry, the Round Table, the Milner Group. To them, the CFR and the Trilaterals represent most of what they do not like in regard to domestic and foreign policy. Some even know that the Round Table has a big input into United States affairs through the British ambassador in Washington. The problem is that real hard information on the treasonous activities of members of the invisible government is very hard to come by. And that's the deal, is most people don't document their illegal activities. If I went out and robbed a bank with 4 other dudes, I doubt I'd come home and have a stash of hundreds of thousands of dollars with a note in there saying, oh, so-and-so and so-and-so helped me get this. And I'm trying to keep my comments brief here, but this is proving hard. But the other thing here is he says this conspiracy goes under various names such as, oh, anybody you've ever heard of, maybe? And I see this all the time. The problem is it muddies the water. The Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilaterals 100% have been very active in the last 100 years. But I've never seen one shred of evidence that the Illuminati have been active in any way since they were disbanded in 1785, or that they were active outside of Bavaria. But just from what I've seen, the more informed authors use that word as a descriptor more than a proper noun. They're not talking about Joe, Jack, and John belong to the Illuminati, located at 33 East 3rd Street. They're just using that word to refer to a secretive organization. It's like if you call somebody Machiavellian, you don't mean they actually hang out with Niccolo Machiavelli. You just mean someone who wields power ruthlessly. And just another example of how reality and internet lore diverge. Machiavelli wasn't actually Machiavellian. That was a character he wrote in the book The Prince. But the man himself wasn't actually the cutthroat authoritarian that people think he was nowadays. That was just a character, and that shows how things get twisted all the time. So I personally have not seen any evidence that any group calling themselves the Illuminated Ones existed past 1785. I know some people would refer to the pyramid on the dollar, but they came up with that design in 1935, definitely after the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, I believe. This design is attributed to Roosevelt and Henry A. Wallace. Roosevelt was an active and dedicated Freemason. Wallace, the 33rd Vice President of the United States, was a Mason. Roosevelt was the 32nd President, followed by Harry Truman, the 33rd President, who was 33rd degree Scottish Rite. So, yes, at that time, Masons were all up in our government, not getting into it too deep right now, but that's who gave us the all-seeing eye design, not the illuminated ones. So I'm just trying to show you guys fact versus fiction so you can see if somebody actually knows what they're talking about. When I hear somebody bust out the Illuminati like it's an actual group today and claiming all these things are their symbolism, then I think, okay, they're just repeating what other people have said and they haven't looked into any of this. And that they're just saying this because they think that makes them look like they know what they're talking about. You can take that for whatever it's worth. If you want to believe everything somebody says because it sounds good, that's fine with me. But believe it or not, I'm trying to save you wasted hours going down dead-end rabbit holes because I've already been there and done that. So we're obviously not going through the whole book here. I'm not making a 10-hour video. We're going to hit on a couple things and then go to the institutions that he says are directly answerable to the Committee of 300. Caused by means of limited wars in the advanced countries and by means of starvation and disease in third world countries, the elimination of 3 billion people by the year 2000. People they call useless eaters. The Committee of 300 commissioned Cyrus Vance to write a paper on the subject of how to best bring about such a G-side. The paper was produced under the title The Global 2000 Report and was accepted and approved for action by President Carter for and on behalf of the U.S. government and accepted by Edwin Muskie, the Secretary of State. Under the terms of the Global 2000 Report, the population of the United States is to be reduced by 100 million by the year 2050. Now, the useless eaters moniker I have heard recycled many times. I'm pretty sure this is the original source of that. And in 1991, when this was written, he says it was to be accomplished by the year 2000, which it wasn't. But the reduction of 100 million people by 2050 may have been accomplished. This is something that not enough people talk about, but we are heading towards a major drop-off in population in this country. People started having a lot less kids by the 90s, and they say 55 to 60% of Gen Z plan to have children. They're trying to keep these numbers as high as they can. I bet the actual number's like 20%. But I did a video on this a while back, and I think the conclusion I came to was about 2035, everything's just going to dive off of a cliff. And part of hiding that fact has been to bring in millions of noobs. And honestly, this is something that should be directly discussed whenever talking about AI and AI taking over jobs. Because in 10 more years or so, there's not going to be new people coming into the workforce to take those jobs. And they know this, but they'll never discuss it openly and honestly with people. But I guarantee you that's a major factor in their push for data centers right now. We can't go back and add 20 million babies to 2015 so that they enter the workforce in 2035. What's done is already done. So I hope this isn't too all over the place to watch, but no subject is a standalone subject. One topic has a bearing on other topics. But reducing the population by 100 million in America by 2050 may have already been accomplished. Institutions through which control is exercised. Profiling is a technique developed in 1922 by the British Army, who set up the largest brainwashing facility in the world at the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations. This became the core of Britain's Psychological Warfare Bureau. When I first introduced the names of Rees and Tavistock into the United States in 1970, very little interest was shown. But over the years, as I revealed more and more about Tavistock and his vital role in the conspiracy, it has become popular to imitate my earlier research. People with limited understanding just name dropping. Britain's Psychological Warfare Bureau made extensive use of the work done by Rees on his 80,000 British Army guinea pigs, captive soldiers who underwent many forms of testing. It was Tavistock designed methods that got the United States into the Second World War, and which, under the guidance of Dr. Kurt Lewin, established the OSS, the forerunner of the CIA. Lewin became the director of the Strategic Bombing Survey, which was a plan for the Royal Air Force to concentrate on bombing German worker housing while leaving military targets such as munition plants alone. The munition plants on both sides belonged to the international bankers who had no wish to see their assets destroyed. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. He just says that it belonged to international bankers. If you had direct information, you would probably list who owned them. But I do think that that is a very accurate portrayal of how power is wielded. I had somebody comment one time that everybody's always looking for Eyes Wide Shut when the world's actually Wolf of Wall Street. Because it wouldn't be hard for somebody to look at this scenario and say, well, they decided to bomb the worker housing instead of the actual munitions because this was part of their satanic ritual offering. Besides, we all know they're all into the occult, right? Okay, yeah, that could be, but honestly, the world runs much more often on greed than true deviousness. So I find it very likely that a banker in Germany has ties with a banker in America who has ties with intelligence because they finance military operations, and therefore they make out a deal. Don't bomb warehouse B because I've got $1 million worth of inventory in there. Take out the worker's house. People always view the power structure as a top-down thing where there's one Mr. Burns at the top, where I think it's much more of a side-by-side thing. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Instead of you guys taking out warehouse B where my $1 million of inventory is, I'll tell you where the workers are housed at plant A, B, and C, and you can take out all three of them. Therefore, it's more beneficial to me because you're not taking out my warehouse B, and it's more beneficial to you because now you're taking out three sites instead of one. And there's a million variations of that kind of deal that can be made. So I would say that the Eyes Wide Shut occult stuff is out there, but I think much more often it's just heartless Machiavellian business. It's really fashionable today and profitable to creators to attribute everything to occult demonic ritual, but don't underestimate the power of greed. That's one of the strongest driving forces in the world, right behind sex. Tavistock provided most of the detailed programs that led to the establishing of the Office of Naval Intelligence, the number one intelligence service in the United States, one which dwarfs the CIA in size and scope. Did you know that? I didn't. I knew it existed, but I didn't know it was that much bigger. Contracts worth billions of dollars were given to Tavistock by the United States government, and Tavistock's strategic planners provide most of what the Pentagon uses for our defense establishment, even today. Here again is illustrated the grip the Committee of 300 has on the United States and the majority of our institutions. Tavistock runs over 30 research institutions in the United States, all of which we will name in our charts at the end of the book. So I'm probably going to have to do a whole video on Tavistock, but how many times have I told you that the methodology being used is to attack our women? Well, I guess I finally found the source of
into
that.
practice between the two world wars and beyond. As will be seen, propaganda was to play a major role. One of the main objectives at Tavistock was to achieve the degradation of women. Tavistock recognized that Jesus Christ has brought a new place of respect in the order of civilization to womanhood, which prior to his coming had not been present. After Christ's ministry, womanhood gained a respect and a high place in society absent from pre-Christian civilizations. Of course, it can be argued that such an elevated status existed in the Greek and Roman empires, and that would be true to a certain extent, but not to the extent that womanhood was elevated in post-Christ society.
If you destroy the morals of men, yet the women of a society are of very high integrity, then the degenerates are just going to die on the vine. They're not going to reproduce because no woman's going to have them. But if you corrupt the morals of the women, then you corrupt the morals of their children and then their children. Okay, I already had everything recorded up to here when this dropped yesterday. And I'm probably going to have to do a video on this because there's quite a bit of interesting stuff in there. But I would say in the big picture of things, for every one person that is truly in touch with demons and into the real deal dark stuff, there's 1,000 people that are just trying to get paid, just trying to make a profit. And in a lot of cases, they truly believe what they're doing is the right thing to do in their situation. So yeah, I think the eyes wide shut kind of stuff does go on. It gets all the attention and the clicks. But since it has that mystique to it and that unknownness to it, it's really easy to bullshit people with it. This is an interview with Oliver Stone's son, and he says a lot of very knowledgeable things in there. But he tells the story of when he was a Mason for a couple years. And first off, I find it kind of interesting that he's claiming to be a Christian, growing up as Oliver Stone's son in Hollywood. That's not usually a formula that produces Christians. And in the story, he says that after his first meeting, they were watching him and they called him on his phone and described what he was wearing. And when he got home, he took his shirt off and he was wearing a cross. Oh, no, wait, I was wearing a sword of Islam. And I said, wait a minute, you were either wearing a cross or a sword of Islam. You're not quite sure which religion it was that you were wearing an emblem of. Okay. But he says that ever since he went to the first meeting, he would get these phone calls and it would be witches cackling and asking him if he's ready to turn his life over to the dark side and all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, they don't do that for everybody that walks into the room, you know? And I think he accurately portrays that there's a process to weed out what kind of person you are. And yes, I agree with that. You don't have to do all that crap to find out what type of person someone is. You trap me in a car for a 4-hour road trip with somebody, and I'll tell you whether or not they're ready to sell their mother for the Dark Lord. Anyway, I find his story a bit incredulous. He is an actor and filmmaker, and I'm not too sure of Tucker's intentions these days. But just speaking as someone with 15 years in internet culture conspiracy lore, if you asked me how to make a video to reach that demographic, I'd tell you do this. And one of the core tenets of the Tavistock Institute is exactly what we're seeing today, is just flood everybody with so much information that they can't make up their mind about anything anymore. Anyway, it was kind of interesting that this video came out on day 3 of me making this video. The reason it took so long is, aside from recording, it's a 250-page book, so I read till I had a headache several times. And there's a whole lot of this. The Committee of 300 is for the most part under the control of the British monarch, in this case, Elizabeth II. Queen Victoria is believed to have been quite paranoid about keeping it secret and went to great lengths to cover up Masonic writings left at the scene of Jack the Ripper incidents, which alluded to the Committee of 300's connection with experiments carried out by a family member who was also a highly placed member of the Scottish Rite. The Committee of 300 is filled with members of British aristocracy, which has corporate interests and associations in every country of the world, including the USSR. The Tavistock Institute at Sussex University and London sites is owned and controlled by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, whose Hofjuden, that's court gray, in America is Henry Kissinger. And there's quite a bit in this book about Henry Kissinger, as there should be. Is he is one of the biggest players in our dark state, or was anyway. He helped to create it. The Eagle Star Group, which changed its name to the Star Group after the close of the Second War, is composed of a group of major international companies involved in overlapping and interfaced areas: insurance, banking, real estate, entertainment, high technology, including cybernetics, electronic communications, etc. Now, there's one industry that always gets left out in conspiratorial world. Shipping is one of the biggest industries in the world, but for some reason you never hear about the evil shipping magnates. In 2019, the total value of shipping is estimated at $14 trillion dollars. For perspective, the oil and gas industry is between 3.5 and 6.3 trillion annually, so it's 2 to 3 times bigger than the oil industry. And tech is valued at 5.6 to 11.4 trillion. So it's on a bad year bigger than tech and oil combined. And it's critical to all of these other industries because without it, you don't get your Chinese iPhone or your Arabian sweet crude, which is what we're seeing in Hormuz right now. But for some reason, you never hear about the Masonic shipping industry when it's a vital control point, more profitable than most other industries. Remember, some of the richest families in the world live in Europe, so it's natural that they should have a preponderance of members on the committee. The von Thurn and Texas family, who once owned the German postal franchise, make David Rockefeller look like a poor relation. The von Thurn and Taxi dynasty dates back 300 years, and generation after generation of family members have had seats on the committee, which they occupy to this day. We've already mentioned by name many of the most wealthy Venetian black nobility members of the Committee of 300, and other names will be added as we come across them in their various fields of endeavor. Now we shall include some American members of the committee and try to trace their affiliations and connections to the British Crown. Now, he did go through with a lot of family names, a lot of businesses, a lot of institutes, and all these lists and everything. But really, he never provided any evidence to back it up. He just says that they're part of the committee. Now, he's definitely onto something. He's researched the most powerful people in the world, and I'm going to be looking into some of them. But when it comes to tying them to this committee that only he knows about, apparently, it's kind of a trust me, bro, I had secret clearance. So I'll entertain the idea and leave it open for if I see other things down the road. But just listing a bunch of real entities that are out there and then saying that they're being run by this committee is an extraordinary claim without the extraordinary evidence to back it up. At least he acknowledges that. How can these facts be verified? Actually, some of them cannot be verified because the information comes straight out of intelligence files that none of us will ever see. But with a lot of legwork, there are many sources which can verify at least part of the facts. The work would involve a diligent search of Dun and Bradstreet reference book of corporations, Standard and Poor's British and American Who's Who, with long hours of hard work and cross-referencing names with their corporate affiliations. Well, here's the deal with that is you're definitely going to find ties between these people. The shipping guys are going to have ties with the fruit guys and the coal guys. All of the heads of industry are going to be dealing with other heads of industry to sell their product or to buy a product and manufacture the raw steel into an automobile. But that doesn't mean they all get together on Saturday night and drink babies, which he's not even claiming in this book, but that's how the internet works. And yeah, that kind of thing apparently is going on, but it's kind of like if there were 5 people in your high school that did that. Well, internet logic is then that everyone in your high school did that. And I just think it's much more rare than others do. Anyway, yeah, the head of one industry is going to have ties to the head of another industry. That doesn't mean that they are all taking orders from Queen Elizabeth II. So I'll wrap up with this. It is obvious that the communications field is tightly controlled. Going back to RCA, we find that its directorate is composed of British American establishment figures who feature prominently in other organizations such as the CFR, NATO, the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, Freemasonry, Skull and Bones, Bilderbergers, Round Table, Milner Society, and the Jesuit Aristotle Society. Among them was David Sarnoff, who moved to London at the same time Sir William Stevenson moved into the RCA building in New York. Man, that's a lot of name dropping, and there's a lot more in this book, ringing all the bells. And just being a skeptic here, he hasn't provided any evidence tying all these people together or any evidence that they're all offshoots of this committee of 300. The Council on Foreign Relations was created in 1921, I think. Club of Rome in 1968. A generation apart with different people involved. So anyway, I hope this video was worth watching. I guess if you're still listening, then it was. I just thought in today's world of believe anything anybody says online, where Joe Blow can tweet something and then everybody, thousands of people on the internet repeat it without anybody actually checking to see if it's true. I thought I'd do a video being skeptical of the information. The only thing people are skeptical of these days is if it came from the government, but if it's some rando theory out there, well, it must be true. I mean, look at how many organizations he listed in this one paragraph. So I don't know. This committee may exist. I'll definitely have it in the back of my mind. If I find something else that fits into this, then I'll make that connection. But just because somebody drops a lot of names and says they have special security clearance, that doesn't necessarily make it true. What is definitely true is each one of these organizations listed here do have a lot of power individually. And like it said earlier about hiding things in plain sight, the Paris Air Show, if you ask me, the two most powerful political entities in the United States right now are the Republican and Democrat parties. And I think those should be broken up. But nobody ever talks about that because they're looking for the they behind the scenes. Yeah, there may be the they behind the scenes, but if you break those two up, then they no longer have that consolidated power in our government. And another thing you might have noticed, might not, but where's the grays in all this? Well, that's a whole subject on its own, but I just thought I'd point out that it's not a topic in this book. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Catch you on the next one. Static out.